Ready?
It's just preparing to go live, Chairman. I'll just... Right, you should be live now, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Hello and welcome to this online meeting on Tuesday, 28th of July of the Governance and Audit Committee. My name's Chris Pearson. I'm Councillor for Beerchurch Ward and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. The meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available to watch afterwards. There are a few matters of housekeeping to begin with. With the exception of the Democratic Services Officer advising us, would participants all please mute their microphones unless they are invited to speak. I will ask for each item of business to be presented and then ask each member of the panel in turn if they wish to ask a question or to comment. At the end of each item of business, I'll ask each panel member in turn to confirm audibly how they wish to vote. We may have a break at 8 p.m. subject to progress of business. If I can just ask around the room for introductions, please. I'll start with Councillor Gocher.
Hello, Councillor Mark Gocher, Castle Ward.
Councillor Wood.
Councillor Barbara Wood, Tiptree Ward.
Councillor Barlow.
Councillor Nick Barlow, Castle Ward.
Councillor McCarthy.
Good evening, Councillor McCarthy. I represent Shrub End Ward and I also deputy chair this panel.
Councillor Willits.
Dennis Willits, Lexington and Braeswick Ward.
And Councillor Dundas.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Stanway Ward.
And Richard, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chairman. Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Officer.
Right, thank you. Oh, and Richard Block.
I'm Richard Block, Assistant Director for Corporate and Improvement Services, and I'm providing senior management team support to the panel.
Thank you and welcome all. No substitutions this evening. I've had no urgent items. Does anyone have a declaration?
I don't know if it's necessary, but as I believe one of the items covers rates grants, I am involved in a business which was in receipt of one.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Dundas. I'm not seeing any other indications, so we'll move on to item 5, have your say. We haven't had any indication of anyone wishing to have their say this evening. Is that right?
That's correct, Chairman.
Thank you. That moves us on then to item 6, the review of governance framework, which is a continuation from our last meeting. Aileen McGrath, you're going to just introduce this for us, aren't you?
Yes, Chair, thank you. So, as you say, this follows on from the last meeting with this committee in June, when I presented the annual governance statement to you, which is a review of how the council has operated their governance arrangements during the financial year 2019 to 20. Whilst the majority of the statement, I think the committee members were happy with, there was a question about the last 2 weeks of that financial year, in terms of that's when we started to go into the lockdown process for COVID-19. And I think there was a little bit of reassurance requested about how we'd made decisions during that period of those last 2 weeks to ensure the governance arrangements were appropriate and were operating correctly. So I brought the report back to you. I've included the original report from last month, but actually added an appendix at Appendix A that sets out the decisions that were made during those 2 weeks. There's 3 types of decisions, and we set out in the table for you those definitions of those 3 types. So we have emergency decisions, urgent decisions, and operational decisions. We've been through the decisions that were made at that time, looked at what services were scaled back, what decisions were made, and actually there was nothing made under the emergency powers, and under the urgent powers there was 2 items. However, neither of those systems were operational at that point in time. It was just the start of the process for information sharing for business rate relief and business grants, but the actual systems didn't go live until the beginning of April. The remainder of the decisions set out on page 11 of the agenda for you looks at the decisions that were taken under our operational powers. Now, the majority of those relate to our business continuity processes. We'd actually been through our business continuity plans back in February, and we looked at how we would respond if we had an increase in a pandemic. And the decisions that were making are in line with the Council's emergency plans and business continuity plans. And I hope that gives a reassurance to the panel, or sorry, to the committee, that the decisions that were taken were properly governed, and that you'll be able to now agree the sign off of the annual governance statement for 2019-20.
Thank you, Ms. McGrath, for a comprehensive update, having been asked by the committee to provide one. Comments and questions, members? Councillor Withits?
Yes, Chairman, we're certainly moving forward on approval of the governance statement, but whether we've moved far enough forward to actually approve it is still an open question in my mind. Chairman, I see governance as a continuous process. It's not something that we say should be there or should not be there because we have an operational decision in a particular time window. Governance is the foundation which underpins the integrity of the council's decision making, and there should really be no time gaps. I mean, we would never dream of suspending financial regulations because we thought there were no fraudsters around this week. And to my mind, the way the period from the 23rd of March to the end of the financial year is dealt with is the wrong way round. We should have said there needs to be a reliable set of governance arrangements in place which reflect the seriousness of the national predicament. And if there happen to be some decisions which operational financial decisions which were difficult, well, they should have been met by the revised governance arrangements. But to say that because there were no serious decisions taken in that time window, it didn't matter that we had slipped out of our normal governance arrangements into what appears to be an ad hoc position, because I have yet to see it fully define what was happening and the criteria for good governance in the last month of the year. Of particular concern is the matter that I raised at the last meeting, Chairman, and that was the scrutiny of decisions had been arbitrarily suspended. Now, again, whether there were decisions to be scrutinised or not is a matter of judgment, may even be a matter of fact. But the question remains, what mechanism for scrutiny was there during this time period? Now, I was much reassured to hear from the leader of the council, the full council, that during all times of the lockdown, there were scrutiny arrangements there. But that is really contrary to the diary of the then chairman of the scrutiny panel, who I understand was not actually involved and invited to participate on behalf of the scrutiny panel. until much later in the day. Now, Appendix A sets out the decisions, but it fails to inform us of what scrutiny arrangements were in place for each decision, whether it was referred to the chairman of the scrutiny panel for an emergency scrutiny decision when that process started. And I consider that to be a particularly important aspect of a good governance arrangement. And of course, during that time, although we were not actually handing out the £42 million of government grant, the process and procedures were being put in place for the business rates relief grants and the government grants for discretionary business. And what was done in that time period affected how the money was handed out just over the end of the financial year. So surely these processes should have been subject to scrutiny, and they were not, and we've not had a report explaining why that was. I just have this feeling of unease that we do not have formal proof that during this critical time window, we had sound systems of internal control. It was we were having to take a different approach as a council, but that does not mean the overall effectiveness of good governance should have lapsed in any way. And I feel until the committee has received a report on all governance issues and the governance framework that applied during that particular time window, and in particular the matter of how scrutiny or review of decisions in lieu of scrutiny was dealt with, I cannot support the annual governance report as I feel it is fundamentally deficient. So I'm afraid this evening, Chairman, I will again be voting against adoption of the annual governance statement. I feel we're almost there, but we still don't have formalised a report which would enable us to say, yes, during that month, we are absolutely happy that the governance framework as modified to reflect the national predicament was satisfactory, and its overall effect would have been to achieve the level of good governance which this council has a reputation for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. Do I have any other speakers? No, I don't see anyone. All right. I think my comment would be, I understand some of your disquiet, Councillor Willits, but I would just remind the committee that we're talking about a period of 8 days at the end of a 12-month period. It was a situation, and I've grown to dislike this word intensely, that was unprecedented. And I think everyone wasn't quite sure what to do, both at a national and a local level in those first few days. I think having looked at everything that was done in those 8 days, I can't see any reason why we shouldn't approve the statement this evening. At the end of this year, we will have a statement for 2021, which will provide more detail, more lessons about what we did, how we did throughout most of, if not all of, the period of the pandemic. So, Ms. McGrath, I'm just going to ask you if there's anything you want to come back on before I put the matter to the committee.
Of course, thank you, Chair. What I would say is we've already instructed our internal auditors to review those processes. So the issues that Councillor Willits raised about ensuring good governance, it's quite difficult to do that immediately within the space of a couple of weeks. However, we have appointed the auditors to do a specialist deep dive review on COVID-19, how the council responded from day one, look at how we changed our processes, and also those governance arrangements for things like the business grants and the rates relief, to give us that reassurance that they're going to be looking at our payment processes. So obviously, our normal process of being able to pay invoices changed slightly in terms of people weren't in the office. So we made sure that those processes could still continue. And the auditors will be doing a thorough report. That will come back to yourselves later on this year. Obviously, they report to yourselves, and I'll be bringing that report specifically for you to give you a little bit more reassurance.
Thank you. Right, so members, we're asked to approve.
Sorry
this
to interrupt,
statement.
Chair, but Mr. Weavers and Councillor Barlow have both got their hands raised.
My apologies. I couldn't see any previously. Councillor Barlow.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think just to follow up on your point, I think the issue we're looking at here is it is this 8-day period, and I think just from what Councillor Willits was saying there about the important, scrutiny is important, but I think the way it's phrasing it, sort of the chair of scrutiny should have been in there when the decisions were being made, which sounded odd to me because the point of scrutiny is it's there to scrutinise the decisions when they've been made. It has to sit separately from that process. You can't have someone in while the decisions are being made and then ask them to scrutinise a decision they were party to the making of. So you have to have that separation in there of scrutiny there. And I think it comes up in this bit, we are talking about this 8-day period at the end, and I think there is a wider review on that to go on. I'm happy to approve this. From what I've seen from other councils, from the places, other organisations, everyone had that similar rush to get things in, and we have documented them. We're opening it up to audit. There will be lessons to learn for everyone because this was, let's say, unprecedented. But I don't see a reason to not approve this governance statement as is with the information we've got in there. And I think there are bigger questions that will have to be asked this time next year about the governance statement, which covers the full implementation of that scheme. But I think when we're in that 8-day period, there's it does to me seem that we have covered the bases properly.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Mr. Weavers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on the comment that Councillor Willits has said about the involvement of scrutiny in looking at some of these decisions. On page 10 of the report, in the urgent category, I just wanted to reassure the committee, just to remind you also that those two decisions that are listed in that column on page 10, so the business rate grant and the discretionary one, both of those decisions were subject to the approval of the chair of scrutiny before they were made. That has been confirmed also at the scrutiny panel because a report was taken to scrutiny and they noted that, and it was mentioned also in a cabinet report where cabinet noted that that decision had been taken and scrutiny's involvement in that. So I just thought I should just make that clear to the committee that those urgent decisions did have scrutiny's involvement and authority from the chair of scrutiny before they were made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Weavers. Councillor Gocher.
Mr. Weavers has just answered one of my questions. The other thing I was just going to ask is, presumably now with the Zoom meetings all up and running and so forth, this situation will not happen again. Should there be another complete lockdown, for example, hopefully there won't, but this 8-day problem won't arise again, presumably, with the systems now in place.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, Councillor Gocher. We've moved on since those first few days and weeks, haven't we? Right, so I say I'm going to come back, councillors, to the fact that we're asked to approve the statement and to agree it is signed by the council leader. Could I have a show of hands? If you just...
Chairman, do you want me to administer the vote?
Yeah. Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you. I shall call councillors' names out individually. You've just indicate whether you agree with the recommendation, against or abstain. So to take you in order, Councillor Barlow.
Agreed.
Councillor Dundas.
Abstain.
Councillor Gocher.
Agreed.
Councillor McCarthy.
Agreed.
Councillor Pearson.
Agreed.
Councillor Willits,
Abstain.
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 Yep. Councillor Wood,
Oh, sorry, abstain.
abstain. That's 4 votes for and 3 abstentions. So the motion is carried.
Thank you, everyone. Hello. I don't know what keeps happening, but it keeps disappearing. So I don't know whether my Wi-Fi is having some difficulties this evening.
Okay, we can hear you fine, Chairman.
You can't? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can, Chairman.
Good. Yes, the screen is disappearing every now and again. So we'll move on then to item 7, the consultation on draft model member code of conduct. Mr. Weavers, you're going to introduce this for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So before you've got my report on the Local Government Association's consultation on a draft model member code of conduct. You recall that prior to 2011, we did have a national model code of conduct, and that model code of conduct was repealed by the Localism Act 2011 when it became up to individual authorities to adopt their own code. And as the report points out, back in 2012, we adopted our current code of conduct, which was based on the Public Law Partnership model code of conduct for Essex. So we agreed locally that we would all adopt a similar worded code of conduct, so there was continuity for members across whatever tiers they were in the councils in Essex. So there was a continuity of behaviours, etc., for all the councillors. This report has its basis from the report that you may remember a while ago. The Committee on Standards and Public Life undertook a review of local government ethical standards, and it did a stakeholder consultation of which this committee responded to. And part of that was to look at whether or not there should be a model member code of conduct brought in. And currently what the LGA are suggesting is that this would be voluntary. It wouldn't be mandatory. In order for a model code of conduct to be brought in, it would require a change in the law, and whether or not the government is keen to do that, we don't know at this stage. So at this point, this consultation is on a voluntary model code of conduct, which the LGA is hopeful that authorities would want to adopt. So, Chair, what I've done is in the report, I've tried to give you a bit of an analysis on what our current code of conduct says, what the draft LGA code says, and obviously there are links to the code, the proposed code and the consultation paper in the report. And I've also given you a bit of commentary. Broadly, Chair, the codes are broadly similar. There is one difference that I would just highlight that the LGA code has in it, which ours doesn't have, and that is including the provision for not bringing the role of councillor or council into disrepute. That is something we haven't got in our current code. And Chairman, if you go through the rest of the report, particularly around in paragraph 3.9, the analysis is all there. I'm sure members have looked at that. What I'm suggesting is that the chair and group spokespersons agree a response. I will work with them to formulate a response on behalf of the committee. Individual members can make their own response on the LGA's website. The consultation is open until the 17th of August. The consultation response itself is a bit prescriptive. I don't know if you've looked at it, you'll see there are specific questions with sort of like little tick box answers, which is broadly, are you agreeable or not agreeable to what is being proposed? And there is a little bit of room where we can put a bit more commentary in. So, Chair, I just wanted to just leave it at that to give you an overview of the consultation and to suggest that we work together in formulating a response on behalf of the Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Weavers. Councillor Gocher, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. And yeah, when I read the code of conduct thing that was linked to the agenda, I did notice some kind of wording that didn't quite make sense on just part of it. It was the column on disclosure of information, and it was the commentary column. I couldn't make head nor tails of the last bit, but I think the grammar was just the wrong way round. But if you could just have a look at it.
Okay, I'll take other questions and comments first before I ask Mr. Weavers to come back and comment. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with Mr. Weaver's comments, really. I think it sounds a strange thing to say because we are a committee, but sometimes deciding detailed wording or something by a committee doesn't really work. So I think it's probably something which the Chair and the group spokes do need to take away and actually look at in detail. I think also perhaps we need to come at it from the other direction a little bit and say, well, where at the moment over the last few years have we found any issues or failings in our current code of conduct? In other words, where isn't it working at the moment? And where it is working, I'm rather inclined to take the view of something's working, trying to fix it sometimes isn't a very good idea. So where we think something's working, then perhaps leave it alone might be the best direction to come at it. But yeah, so let's look at our current one, and if we think it's fine, then let's do so. Let's keep it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dundas. I think that's a reasonable point to make. And of course, we do get an annual report as to how it's being used. Councillor Barlow.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd agree with the points that we made so far. I think from the paper and from what Mr. Weavers was saying, I think one of the issues with it, which I'll sort of ask, I'll probably do a response to my own, but also ask you to look at in yours, is, as Mr. Weaver pointed out, there's some points where the proposed code is a lot vaguer than our existing one, and I think that in some cases it sort of, it raises this question of does it apply, or what will it apply, or won't it apply in certain situations? And I think in an issue like this, you need to have more specific, be more specific. Sorry, I was trying to make a word up there, I think, because the problem can be, I think many of us will have seen over the year under codes of conduct and standards regimes and that, there is always that potential for malicious complaints against people. And the vaguer the wording of a term in the code of conduct is, the easier it is then to twist that against someone. And I think there's also going to be a case for sort of saying, stressing that this is a model. It's not one that's going to be imposed on people, and councils are free to develop and keep their own as is, which I think will need to be stressed. And I think this is something we'll be dealing with over the next few months, this whole idea of local government reorganisation coming in. Is the problem is this could then become by default, just get imposed if new councils are created, just get imposed on people. So I think there is that issue of making sure that what comes out of this process is actually fit for purpose and is, is much more specific and less vague in those places that have been identified.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other indications, so I think I share Councillor Dundas's view that a smaller group of us looking at this is probably the best way forward. So unless there's anything else, Mr. Weavers, you want to comment on in response?
Yes, Chair, if I could, just picking up Councillor Gocher's comment, I'm struggling to see exactly where he was referring to in the model code. I wonder if you could give me a bit of a clue and I could try and help you with a response.
Sorry, I've not got the document in front of me because I'm on my phone, I'm afraid.
Oh, right.
But no, I was reading down. There was a series of columns, and there was one disclosure of information. It was the bit about how you shouldn't basically disclose confidential information. That section, and it was the commentary bit at the end. Just it went through. went through about 3 columns, and then there was a commentary column with commentary at the top.
Okay.
And
Well,
there's some of the wording there seemed like gobbledygook, but
okay. Thank you, Councillor Gocher. I'm just thinking in order
if
to
I was
move us
looking at
forward,
that,
in order to move us forward, then, because the suggestion is that that the chair and group spokespeople meet with Mr. Weavers to finalise what we would want for Colchester Borough Council. That gives you the opportunity to direct Mr. Weavers to the specific points that you were making before we meet between now and the next meeting, doesn't it? Councillor Barlow?
Yeah, just quickly, Chair. I think the point Councillor Goach is looking at is at the bottom of page 26 of our agenda, the last sentence in the bottom right box on there. It may be better to say that it is a breach to disclose believe that the council, if the councillor knew or ought to have known. Which I suspect some words have got transposed within that sentence. I think it's an anagram that makes up a sentence that makes sense, but within itself it doesn't. So I think the general thrust of what Mr. Weavers is trying to say there is clear. I just think that sentence is obviously.
I think he'd been watching Yes Minister that night when he wrote that.
Apologies to Councillor Gocher and apologies to the committee. Yeah, I think there's the right words, but not necessarily in the correct order.
All right. Thank you both. And I say, Councillor Gocher, the offer still stands as well. If that isn't, and if there's anything else that you've spotted, to submit that, and we'll take it on board. So just coming back then, members, we're asked to review this documentation and to finalise the council's response using a group of the chair and the group spokespeople. All agreed? Yeah, I don't think we need to put that to the vote, Richard, if that's all right.
Okay.
I think there's unanimous nods of agreement. Thank you. So that moves us on to item 8, the initial summary of digital council meetings. And I know I thought it was important that we had an early review of digital working. I know there are still lessons to be learned. There's still lots of detail that we don't have in front of us, but I thought it was an opportunity for us and also for any other members via the members of this committee to just have an input into how digital working has gone to date, and whether or not there aren't any lessons that we could incorporate in the immediate future rather than waiting for a full and frank discussion at our September meeting. Over to you then, please, Ms. McGrath.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, following your request, I just put some brief details together for you to start that conversation and discussion. Obviously, we didn't have any video conferencing facilities set up for our committee meetings prior to COVID-19, and we've introduced a lot of change in a very short period of time, and a lot of work has been undertaken by the Democratic Services team alongside councillors to actually enable people to partake in online meetings, and there's been a lot of training carried out, a lot of guidance that has been issued in terms of how meetings should be conducted. And I think it's fair to say there has been some really positive feedback from the introduction of having virtual meetings, especially from members of the public. So we've had a lot of positive comments regarding the ability to partake in the decision-making process when people would have not been able to do that previously. And I've also set out for you a table at 5.5 on page 32 that shows the number of views per meeting. So now we've had a full cycle of meetings, and that will include those that are live at the time and those that are archived meetings where people go back and review. And it would be fair to say that there will be a selection of people viewing those committee meetings. There'll be other authorities looking to see how we're doing it. There'll be other members logging in who hadn't been at that committee meeting themselves. There'll be officers. But I think it's fair to say there will also be a large proportion of members of the public. And what I've done as well is I've also got some stats from our audio meetings from last year, where we obviously live streamed audio for our meetings. And in June and July last year in total, we had a total number of listeners of 2,371. Now, that was a bit of an anomaly because in July we had the local plan meeting and there was a large number of listeners to that. And we had a total of, if I split them out, 665 listeners in June and 1,706 listeners in July. So as I say, a total of 2,371 compared to a total of 3,405 views for our live streaming over that period from the 1st of June to the 15th of July this year. So I think we can see there's been a definite increase in numbers. There hasn't been any negative feedback. We've had no negative comments from members of the public. There has been some issues raised by officers and members about etiquette, and obviously that's a learning process for everybody involved in terms of they've not been used to being exposed quite so much previously during a meeting. And I think it's important for us to get a bit more detail about this to bring back that report for you in September. And what we're going to do is a consultation with councillors and officers to get some feedback on what they feel has worked well and what they feel hasn't worked so well, and then the improvements that could be made. So we'll feed that into the report for you, as I say, for September. And obviously we will also be looking at how we manage meetings going forward. At this point in time, there's no decisions about timescales for reintroducing physical meetings. We're going through that health and safety process, reviewing the ability to use our meeting rooms in the town hall and how they would need to be set up and what sort of requirements we would need for those. So it will include details of that for you in the September report. But this is to give you that little bit of information to start off with and generate some of that conversation.
Thank you very much, Ms. McGrath. I have to say I was singularly impressed with the numbers that have been digitally watching us in this early stage, so I'm pleased to see that. I saw Councillor McCarthy, then Councillor Dundas, then Councillor Barlow indicating, and now Councillor Willits. So in that order, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Hayley. And I welcome bringing this to the panel actually early as an initial summary. I think that's wise. The sheer volume of people that have actually watched the YouTube videos is really encouraging. It was this committee that were looking to, I'm sure it was last year, we were looking to actually open up the meetings further and potentially incorporate filming of meetings. So this is quite a welcome addition, really, that has not almost been forced upon us, but we've allowed the public to have a proper engagement and look at what we're doing. I'm really, really grateful for the sheer volume of work that has gone into this initially. I think we were all quite nervous getting onto Zoom meetings and Teams as it was at the beginning. I think we've all learned a lot, and I'm really grateful for the training that went on early as well. And we've done a really excellent job on allowing members of the public to be included in meetings with Have Your Say. And I know that was a bit of an issue to begin with. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this develops. I welcome feedback from all councillors further down the line. There's no questions, but it's more just a thank you. And actually, this is quite a good thing, really.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. Yes, I know Councillor Willits, as our group spokes, has been collating some opinions from our group, so I'm not going to spoil his thunder or steal his thunder by covering any of that. I'll just give my personal opinion, and it has, I think, been very successful. It's amazing how natural it's all become very quickly, you know, and how well, thinking back to full council, how well it flowed and actually worked. You actually forgot you were working virtually after a little while, and it all seemed quite normal. I think we will obviously have to go back to, when we can, to some form of physical meetings, but I certainly wouldn't want to lose everything we've gained from this experience. I think just the sheer amount of time saved in popping back and forth to the town hall and Rowan House, if you add it up, is enormous. And if you collate, a portion, you know, probably, I don't know if anybody else has, I've noticed I'm using less fuel as well. I know I should be cycling in, but for those of us who don't always cycle in, I bet we've noticed that we're using less, and that means less emissions. So that's all good. So yeah, I think for short meetings, I think certainly for visiting councillors who basically end up going to the town hall, sitting there for half an hour, speaking for 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and then driving all the way back home or by whatever method, I think some sort of at least a hybrid system I think we should definitely implement. I think that's a no-brainer, as they say. I also think it's important that we think about the flexibility. I mean, the job of counsellor is a bit of an odd one in that I'm sure we've all come across people who would make very good counsellors but can't do the job because it doesn't fit in with their life. So the more flexible we are for people, people work stranger and stranger hours, people travel a lot, people have childcare issues. If there is a way, perhaps on occasions when counsellors can attend a meeting remotely, when for whatever reason they can't attend it physically, I think we should try and put something in place, because I've certainly noticed that actually we are getting less substitutions and much better attendances at all committees and council meetings. Now, I know we could argue that's because nobody's got anything else to do at the moment, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think we're getting a better attendance. And as we said, okay, we'd love to see hundreds of thousands of people watching, I'm sure, but actually we are getting more interest online. And yeah, it goes to show that we will have to go, when we go back to some sort of physical meetings, it can't be exactly the same as before, and I wouldn't want it to be.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. Speak for yourself, though, when you talk about the amount of work that we have to do outside of here.
Oh, yeah, that's my point. Yes. Yeah.
Councillor Barlow.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm going to say I've actually missed the walks up and down the hill for meetings, so it's cutting down on my exercise. I said a couple of points. First, I think I know this is specifically about meetings, but I think one thing we should be addressing in the review when it comes up is the things around briefings and that go on around meetings. I found those have actually been quite useful doing those virtually, and I think even if we have to go back to having physical meetings, I think with what I've always found in the past being a chair or a group spokes, whatever, is that bit of trying to get everyone together a week before for what maybe only be half an hour, just go through the agenda. That's the sort of thing I think we should be looking in the future, regardless of doing online wherever possible. And second, in terms of the experience of doing meetings, I found it quite enjoyable doing it. The one thing I'd raise though is that is a very different experience, and put it to you, Chair, as chairing a meeting to just being a participant in one. And that's probably from having chaired local plan, which is quite a big meeting, quite a stressful thing going on. But I found, even compared to chairing the physical meeting, chairing the online meeting, because there's so many different things I have to keep track of at the time, and you can't just sort of glance, whereas at the regular meetings I could have just glanced at the Democratic Services Officer to my side and asked a quick question. Here it's a lot harder, and so I think that's something we need to sort of look at in terms of the review, is how is the different experience in those different roles, not just sort of assuming there's a single experience for all councillors participating, because like I said, this committee is a lot easier for me than local plan because I don't have to be completely on it every second of it, which I feel I have to be when I'm chairing.
Thank you. Councillor Willits. You're on mute, Dennis.
Sorry, missed the icon when I clicked on it. I'm flabbergasted, Chairman, by the number of people who are finding local government interesting, because we've poured over this for hours in the past. How do we actually relate to the people of the borough? How do we let them know what decisions we're taking on their behalf? And some of them are really extremely important decisions. But it appears our wish is now coming true, that we have a medium which allows those who are interested to see just what is going on, how decisions are made. I'm surprised, but I'm extremely pleased that that has come about, Chairman. In terms of issues, being a lazy so-and-so, instead of thinking up my own ideas of how what needs to change, I did canvass my political group just to find out what their views might be. The first issue is a rather difficult one, and that is we don't seem to take into account members' time whenever we're doing cost equations, like how much do we save by having our meetings online. We always tot up the amount of officer time that's saved, but we never put any value on that for councillors. Now, it may be that that is a correct decision and the councillors are of no value whatsoever. And I think many of the residents would probably agree with that analysis. But I think from a fair accountancy point of view, we should be saying, yes, if a member has to travel from Tiptree to the town hall, or from Mersey to the town hall, or even has to walk up North Hill and it takes 15 minutes, half an hour, or so on. When we're looking at these broad decisions, such as should we aim to continue with teleconferencing or video conferencing, we should be putting a notional value on councillors' time. Now, perhaps not the full charge out rate of £195 per hour, but there should be some notional cost to involving a councillor in travelling or in hanging around while they wait 2 hours for their item to come up at the planning meeting. But we don't do that at the moment, and I think we would have a better understanding of just how effective new ways of working, such as the video conferencing is, if we were to have perhaps a fairer accounting or notional accounting of councillors' time. The second issue, which really arises from the full council meeting, is that there is a view that some members have still not been adequately trained to deal with the situation of a large virtual meeting involving 51 people held under extremely formal conditions. And it was obvious at that meeting that one or two members, just as I was a moment ago, had difficulty finding their mute button. One member horrifically found that their Windows went into an update routine just as the chairman called for, or the mayor called for order, and they could effectively do nothing on their computer for about 20 minutes. And even that should have been advised up, I think, to members that you've got to make sure your computer is ready to go, fully updated before a meeting. And I think, I don't know who the portfolio holder is who is responsible for training, but I think perhaps we should just as a committee send them a message saying, can we review the training given to all members? And we shouldn't make an assumption that every member is absolutely computer literate. The next point is a call for a vote. And now, Chairman, this evening you've taken a very balanced view in sort of casting your eye around or asking for members whether they actually wish to vote, whether there is the appetite for a vote, or whether we can just all nod and move quickly on to the next issue. And several of the Conservative members thought that perhaps that would speed up council meetings if there's several votes where we had a fully named vote, but it was unanimous, and the mayor could probably have ascertained by a quick request, does anyone want to vote, as to whether it was necessary to go through the full 7-minute procedure to carry out a named vote. The next point is one which Councillor Goach has already referred to this evening, Chairman, and that is the two-screen problem. That when we're Zooming on any complex matter, we need to have one screen to see all our colleagues, as we can this evening, to look into their eyes and see whether they appear to be telling the truth. And we need another screen which enables us to bring up the agenda for the meeting. And we need to be able to quickly move between one and the other. Now, I'm working in my office space where I've got sort of 3 screens normally on the desk, so it's not a problem. But it is difficult when you've got a meeting with sort of 200 pages of detailed information to be able to flip between that and Zoom and not lose out and get totally lost and end up with neither the document nor the video conferencing in front of you. And my final point is that when we watch Question Time in Parliament and some of the debates in Parliament, they seem to have arrived at a very amiable hybrid arrangement for meetings where a certain number of members will go into the chamber, but those who, for one reason or another, find it more convenient to conference in are doing so. And even in a large assembly like Parliament, and several of my colleagues have been amazed how well it has all worked, with discipline amongst the people involved, clearly a high level of expertise amongst those in the back office who are actually running the debates and making sure the right person is on screen at the right time. And I certainly hope that we could set as one of our objectives that we can move towards a hybrid arrangement. But of course, that does depend upon government, because until the lockdown, we were not permitted to do this. But given the experience which we've now had and how well it's worked here and in Westminster, I hope we will be making an extremely strong case that hybrid meetings should be permitted in future. Other than that, I think it's worked amazingly well, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. I'm not seeing any other indications. Councillor Gocher, Councillor Wood, anything? Councillor Wood.
Yes, I just want to say that I've enjoyed the Zoom meetings. I find them very useful. I mean, for instance, tonight, if we were going to the town hall, I'd have to leave an hour earlier to get there. And it's nice to sort of walk into the room 10 minutes earlier and just sit down and speak to everyone. I think it's brilliant. But I do miss the face-to-face contact. That I find very useful as well. But anyway, the Zoom meetings have been good. And I ought to thank the people behind the scenes that have helped us get trained for this. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Gocher.
Yes, I'd just like to add my thanks as well to Democratic Services for all the work they've done getting this up and running. I'm actually away on holiday at the moment, so I'm zooming into the meeting on my phone, and that in itself indicates an important point. I think that doing it this way does make it a lot more accessible, especially during this summer holiday period. Well, for teachers like myself. But I totally agree with the comments that have been made by several members already about the need for a hybrid system once we move back to some kind of normal state, because allowing people to access or join the meeting this way does mean that you will get far less substitutions, and it's just better to have that flexibility, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Gocher. Yeah, I'd like to start by just thanking all of the officers who were involved in making this happen at such short notice, because I know it must have involved an inordinate number of staff hours to do so, as well as clear leadership to get it up and running the way we have done so successfully in such a short period of time. So thank you to each and every one of you who's been involved in that. I think Ms. McGrath, you referred to a consultation process between now and our next meeting, and you talked about councillors and officers being involved in that consultation, which I think is absolutely right. It should involve the officers. I'd also just like to add, though, I think we ought to involve the public, because there may be views out there that either officers or members don't pick up, but somebody who's viewing us from the outside may see and may have a point about, or a viewpoint about. So I'd like to see us include the wider public in that consultation exercise. I obviously have been pushing for a number of years now to ensure that we open up what we do to the wider public of Colchester in as accessible a way as possible. And I think this has gone a long way towards doing that. Some of the issues that have come back from my group were around voting. And I know one of the things that was suggested was that there are some systems out there for electronically voting, and it's whether or not, rather than using the nod of the head that I used for the one item this evening, there isn't a way whereby we can just push a button on our laptops, our tablets, whatever we're using, to indicate how we're voting on a particular matter, rather than having to do a named vote on a regular basis. I appreciate that there will be times when a named vote is appropriate, but not for most of the votes that we take. There've already been comments made this evening about etiquette, And I think we have to recognise that some of the 51 members will be quite experienced at using virtual meetings and will have become much more experienced at using virtual meetings over the past four months or so. But there are some members of our council who probably the only time they've ever used a virtual meeting has been their first meeting or their first bit of training, doing what we are doing tonight. So I think it's important to recognise that, you know, there are some of us who are very adept, and there are others of us who still need a lot of hand holding, and we need to ensure that that hand holding and that support, that learning, that training continues to be available for those members. The other thing that I wanted to talk about as well, and I know Councillor Goethe, you've mentioned more than once this evening that you're using your phone. And I think that's a bit of an awkward way in which to access a virtual meeting. So, and we've also, more than one of us this evening have talked about having to dual screen. And I think one of the things that I would like us to look at is actually the equipment that we don't make available to members and to officers to fully utilize and to make full use of virtual meetings so that they are as effective as they possibly can be. I know there would be an initial cost, but ultimately that cost would probably be far outweighed by the benefit of ensuring that all members and officers who are servicing these meetings have appropriate equipment to do so. Not only in an efficient and effective manner, but also in the most safe and ergonomically appropriate manner. So agree, we need to go out to consultation. We're not required to make any remarks or comments or recommendation this evening, but I have no doubt that Mr. Weavers, Ms. McGrath and Mr. Clifford will take back our remarks. I will continue as well to present and push those, and no doubt the group leaders will as well. I'm looking at Councillor Dundas when I say that. So I think that's all, unless there's anything you want to come back with, Ms. McGrath.
No, I think all of the issues that have been raised and all the comments made were ones that we would anticipate, and issues that we ourselves have identified in terms of running these meetings. What I would say is the Democratic team has put in a lot of work for that, and they really appreciate the thanks that you've given them tonight, and for the support that you've given them in being able to put that training in place. And I think it's important, as you say, to make sure that we carry on with some of the benefits that this has demonstrated for us.
Thank you. All right.
Chairman, Councillor Goethe and Councillor Willits have raised their hands again.
That's what I get for looking down rather than looking up straight away. Councillor Goethe.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand. It was a mistake.
All right. Councillor Willits, you're on mute.
Similar.
Okay. Right. So I'll start again then. We'll move on to item 8, the work programme. You've all seen the work programme. I don't think there's anything missing from there, anything we need to add. Are we agreed with the work programme? Mr. Clifford.
Can I just indicate that we also need to add into the September meeting the review of the digital meetings, the formal review, so that'll be added into the programme.
Yeah. So apart from that amendment, we all agreed to the work programme for the remainder of the year. Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion of our meeting this evening. Thank you one and all. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Chair, good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Right, good night.